October meeting of the COG Board of Directors to order, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's good to see everybody. First, we always start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so let's do that. Virtually pick the flag you want to look to. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, and justice for all. All right, for the record, we are a lot more in sync in person than in virtual for the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll know that. Let me do a couple of our chairman's report items on agenda item number 2, our standard reminders that we want you to keep our mics muted when we're not speaking here. Obviously, just unmute when you need to and utilize that chat box, which staff will be keeping a close eye on throughout. As a reminder, our webinars audio and video are being live streamed on the COG website through COG's YouTube account as well. I've got a couple of quick announcements I want to be able to share. The Farm Committee is hosting their annual regional farm tour on October 18th. This year's tour is featuring the agriculture and urban farming in the District of Columbia. I went on this tour last year in Virginia. I thought it was outstanding, and helping see and kind of connect the dots of our food supply and distribution was really helpful, frankly. But also, I know that we were in Maryland 2 years ago, Virginia last year, and I don't want our DC farms, and yes, we do have farms, urban farms, to get left out. So it's a great opportunity to see how we use, in a 100% urban space, some creative uses of our farm spaces. So would welcome and encourage everyone to come join us for that. I know I'll be joining. I think there's one of the stops is at one of our schools that has a big food prints program that I'll be stopping by as well. Hopefully everybody received the invitation by email last week, and staff's going to send a registration reminder this afternoon for everybody. Also, I want to remind everybody we have the COG annual meeting and awards reception on December 11th. I want to strongly encourage everybody to please attend. We've also mixed up the format on that a little bit from what we've done in the past. So if you haven't already, please register. We need board members to submit nominations for individuals to receive our annual awards as well. Staff will put links in the chat for now for that registration and nomination awards. This morning, one quick follow-up from our last meeting. We had a great presentation on elections. And so this morning, we actually sent out a statement on the upcoming general election, affirming the integrity of our election system, applauding the region's election workers and volunteers for their service. If you remember, after we had a really good discussion on elections across the region, there was a recommendation that we put out a statement in support of all of our processes, which I think COG has been consistent on over the years, but also just recognizing the sheer amount of misinformation, disinformation, and unfortunately threats that are going towards our election workers, to collectively put out a statement in support of all those individuals that make our elections free and fair and do so with just great integrity day in and day out. So that statement went out today. We'll also note that in 2023, the COG board approved a resolution that had called for continued regional participation in the Electronic Registration Information Center, affectionately known as ERIC, which provides local and state election officials with voter reports to prevent fraud and ensure accuracy. The board continues to encourage full participation by the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia as a part of that resource. As just a quick reminder, we saw over the last 2 years, some states deciding to withdraw from these databases and these resources that actually help make sure that our voter rolls are clean. And so we wanted to make sure that we spoke to that as a region back in 2023. Again, I think the release that we just put out, or the statement, I think has been linked in our chat. So please take a look at it. And again, my thanks for that recommendation at our last meeting. Moving to agenda item number 3, I'm going to turn it over to Clark Mercer, our executive director, to share out his report. So Mr. Mercer, let me kick it over to you.
All right, everyone can hear me okay? Good, we're good to go. Andrew, you're good. Okay, good. Supervisor Bailey, wanted to make sure you were plugged in. All right, got some good announcements and shout outs. Commuter Connections had our 50th anniversary celebration at the National Press Club last week, and we keynoted by board member Mayor Bowser, who did a fantastic job. Our TPB board chair, Christina Henderson, and vice chair, James Walkinshaw, were there, helped MC and give out awards to a number of different companies who are really leaning in on transit and commuter connections, getting folks back and forth to work in a good fashion in the region. So congratulations to the team. Dan Sheehan runs Commuter Connections. and Doug Franklin, the senior marketing manager, in particular, knocked it out of the park. Clean Energy Forum is coming up. We handed out flyers to this and sent the invites to everyone over email at the last meeting. This is on Monday, October 28th from 10 to 4. So here's the ask for everybody. This is going to be at George Mason University, and it's going to be all things solar, particularly rooftop solar on your governmental buildings and your schools. There's a lot of money out there to deploy rooftop solar on those types of facilities, and we're going to have everyone in that ecosystem, the feds, folks that understand how to get the money, procurement type folks, solar companies. We're going to have the right people there for your folks to learn everything they need to learn to get more rooftop installations and wildly successful stories to share in terms of how much money our localities are saving by putting rooftop solar on their government and school installations. DMV moves continues to move. We've had a task force meeting on September 23rd. Have another one in November. We are pivoting, I think, pretty quickly to one. How are we going to implement these recommendations to better coordinate and drive efficiencies rather than talk about them at a high level? Tactically, if we agree on a certain set of issues, how are we going to implement them? There's been a clear charge from our co-chairs to move in that direction. And we're talking funding, and we still have some financial questions to run to ground, but clearly a financial need for transit writ large, and we have to figure out sources to close that gap, and the group is getting more serious about talking about what those sources are and what gaps they would close. Two related items to DMV moves. Last week, along with WMATA, I briefed the congressional delegation transportation staff to keep them in the loop in terms of what we're doing and obviously the role that we hope the feds will continue to play and play an even larger role in helping to fund transit and WMATA system in particular. And had a meeting along with WMATA's finance team last week at the Department of Transportation, the Build America Bureau. The director met with our teams to walk us through their TIFIA loan program and to really drill down to make sure that our transit agencies and WMATA are making full use of this program. Two awards that COG is getting based on all of your hard work. One is from the Washington Regional Alcohol Awareness Program, RAP. They have a luncheon next week where we're being awarded recognition of our efforts to decrease drunk driving in the region. And then this Friday, I'm participating in a keynote panel, the National Capital Planning Commission and the American Planning Association, where we're also getting an award for our scenario planning. That was a pretty in-depth look at kind of what the federal government's office needs and in-office work posture could be, looking at different scenarios and what that impact on the region would be. We've had a couple really good housing gatherings. Big shout out to Hillary, who's on September 27th. We had the housing directors and planning directors met jointly to talk about housing affordability and zoning and land use reform. And at that meeting, Housing and Urban Development Community Planning Department Director was here to particularly recognize the work of that committee and Hillary's team with all that they have done. Related to housing, homeless service providers from the region had an all-day workshop with our partners at Community Solutions on data-informed strategies to end the experience of homelessness in the region. Water supply, big shout out to our chair, Mr. Allen, for participating on September 24th. We had a rollout, with the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, highlighting the significant financial consequences facing the region in the event of a disruption to the area's water supply. So we have our team has money that's been awarded from the feds to look at a secondary water source, and this was highlighting that very important issue. And then lastly, a shout out to Fong and our water quality team. We participated in the Festival del Rio Anacostia, the 9th annual festival in Bladensburg on the Anacostia River. This is a Latino festival, 9th year running with lots of our environmental partners. And it was a really, really beautiful day. Lots of people out in the water. The Anacostia was spotless. You didn't see any trash on it. People were rowing, people were fishing, people were paddleboarding. And at that festival, we started to film what you will see soon. It's replacing our podcasts. We are going to be doing 5 to 10-minute videos where we're out in the region showing people the work that we do, working with our elected board members and our partners across the region, something that's a little bit more consumable in bite-sized nuggets, 5 to 10-minute videos. And the first one will center around the work we have done cleaning up the Anacostia River. And that concludes my report, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer. Let me just check to see if anybody had any questions for Mr. Mercer before we move to the next agenda item. I'm not seeing any. All right, then we'll move to agenda item number 4, which is amendments to our agenda. So I actually have one recommended amendment to today's agenda, and I'll walk us through this. It's to add an additional item to the agenda item number 6 on the consent agenda. So what I want to do is move to add resolution R30-2024, which would authorize COG to receive a grant from Loudoun County to establish the Learners Workforce Program to today's consent agenda. I know this kind of came in late, but I've been talking with the COG staff about it, and I think we should add this in. No COG matching funds are required, and you all can review resolution R30 on page 19 of the board packet if you'd like. But I know our colleagues from Loudoun County asked for this to be added in, and I agree and want to make sure we do this. So let me see if there is a second to that motion first.
Second. Second.
Oh, see the
To adopt the
problem.
agenda as amended.
Okay, all right. I could not tell. I heard so many seconds. I think I saw Emmett Jordan, so I'm just going to pick
I'm
you.
trying to check. I'm trying to second from Loudoun County, Chair Randall.
All right, well, Chair Randall, I think you get prerogative here. So sorry, Mr. Jordan, but we'll do Chair Randall as the second there. Thanks. So
Thank you.
we have a motion and a second now. So before I call for a vote to approve the amendment, is there any discussion or questions anyone has about this?
No, I would just say I am sorry that it came in a little late, but we are not asking for matching funds, and we think it's an amazing program that will help so many people receive skills, especially in technology.
Absolutely, I concur, and absolutely.
And thank you to Scott Box, who did a great job last night in presenting.
Excellent. All right, well, with that, then let me go ahead and ask for the vote. So remember that what we do on virtual is that we're going to ask for abstentions and nays. That way we catalog that. So are there any abstention or nay votes? I'm not hearing any, so that means all are in favor. So hearing none, the motion now passes, and so that'll be added to our consent agenda. Are there any additional amendments to today's agenda that anyone wanted to make? All right, seeing none, then we shall move on. So our next item is number 5, approval of minutes from our September 11th, 2024 meeting. So let me move to approve the minutes from September 11th board meeting. Is there a second?
Second, Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you for saying the name. That way I can figure out who said it first. Supervisor Bailey, thank you for the second. Let me now call for a vote to approve the September 11th, 2024 minutes. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? And hearing none, the motion passes unanimously then. So next we're going to move to the consent agenda. This is item number 6, which again, we just amended moments ago. We have 7 resolutions on the consent agenda today for a lot of very interesting projects across our region, including approving appointments to the board nominating and legislative committees, receiving a grant for a PFAS reduction in biosolids and filtrate project, receiving a grant to execute the Anacostia River cleanup, entering into an agreement with George Mason University to accelerate action on climate change, and our last resolution authorizing COG to enter into an agreement with Loudoun County to develop a natural resources strategy, and by amendment today, same with Loudoun County, establishing a workforce program. So let me move to approve our consent agenda at this time. Is there a second?
Second,
Chair Randall.
Thank you, Chair Randall, for the second. So now let me call for a vote to approve our consent agenda. Again, I'll do so by calling for any abstentions or nay votes. All right, and not seeing or hearing any, that means the motion is going to pass. Thank you all very much. So next, we're going to move to agenda item number 7, which is our fiscal year 2026 member dues and regional fees. We're joined by Mr. Mercer and COG's Chief Financial Officer, Julie Mussog, to brief the board on the proposal for the fiscal year 2026 member dues and regional fees. Following the presentation, the board is going to be asked to adopt Resolution R26-2024 as recommended by COG's Budget and Finance Committee. So Mr. Mercer, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I will be brief and hand it off to Julie in a moment. And just want to start by recognizing Julie and her entire team's efforts. I feel super comfortable and confident with how the finances are being run here at the council. And I just applaud Julie's efforts, clean audits, feedback loops, lots of checks and balances. So I think we're making a dollar stretch pretty far here. And the first few slides, Amanda, you can kind of run through them. You all have seen these before on what we do. The producing results for the region, I would just kind of note a couple of those. We talked about DMV moves. I think almost every week, if you go back one, Amanda, if you go, every week we had a air quality alert from our air team. The mutual aid agreement, we are meeting Scott's team constantly with our public safety officials, emergency preparedness folks, and our 3-letter agencies for the election coming up. Already have entered into contracts for an inauguration in 2025. The water quality work that we do with Blue Plains and negotiating with all the localities of how much wastewater treatment will go to that plant. I mention those because those are things that I didn't realize necessarily that COG did when I took this job, and every day I learn a new thing that COG does. So that kind of told me a couple things. One, I probably need to do a better job of looking into that before I interviewed. But two, we should do a better job of explaining that to all of our members and your council members and colleagues on your boards and commissions. So as we talk about this budget, I also would like to make sure I'm coming out to your councils and chatting a little bit about what COG does for the region. And it's not intuitive to folks that a lot of folks assume that we use most of our membership dues to fund all our programs. So 9% of what we do here at COG, under 10%, is funded through member dues. The rest, largely state and local dollars. And I say that because, as you all know, at your own counties and cities, those state and local dollars are tied to specific programs here at COG. A lot of that is pass-through money, and it often ties our hands with what we're able to work on. And topics like housing, homelessness, all of our health work, our regional incident system, the economic development district work that we've talked about, our real-time crime database, our violence interruption work, the topics that a lot of times we hear the most from our board members about are not funded by those state and local dollars. They're funded by that 9% member dues. And those member dues also go to matching some of our federal dollars. Most notably, Transportation Planning Board requires a 10% match or an additional $200,000 every year to unlock $2 million in federal funds. So we're super grateful for the member dues. Putting them in perspective, it's about 9% of our total budget. And Julie will speak to this. This year, the rate increase is 3 cents or 3.55%. And last year, the increase was a little bit larger, 3.5 cents or 4.32%. The totality of the increase this year is 5%, and that is because it's good news. We have a population increase of a little over 0.75%, which is a good news story. The last few years, we have not necessarily had that type of growth in the region, and dues are tied to population as well. So with that, let's get to slide number 10 and let Julie take over. The last piece, and we always go over this, it's in slide 7 there, and I will just note that as an area when folks ask me, what should I be focused on as a member? And where could COG grow even more? It's in our purchasing program, our cooperative purchasing program. Some of our localities take more advantage of that than others. But if we have something, a widget that everyone in the region buys, we will have a contract for that you can call off of. Things like bottled water, diesel gas, road salt. And then if there's, particularly in the homeland security space, kind of highly technical, very expensive equipment that you may not have the procurement folks on staff with the expertise to or want to engage in a procurement for, we procure equipment in that space as well. And I would just say two things. One, it's an area where we, COG, can do a better job of advertising that to all of our members and your procurement staffs. But two, we can certainly work with you to encourage your procurement staffs to use those contracts more often, because they can save significant money for your localities. We have some of our members that save more money through this program than they pay in dues for the year. So it does yield savings if used, and we're going to continue to ramp that up. And we have a new procurement officer here on staff, and that is certainly a priority area for him. So with that, Julie, I'll hand it off to you to run through some of the details. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Clark. So as you're probably aware from prior years, there are 4 main ways that member dues are used. 2 of which are in matching capacity, and that's the vast majority of member dues are used to leverage federal funds or other additional funds, programs that are, grants that we're getting outside of federal, but also state money in order to receive these larger dollars. So the vast majority of member dues is used to leverage federal resources. And that's 31% of member dues. So 1.7 million in these member dues leverages I'm sorry, can you go back 2 slides? I think we're a little ahead. So 41% of the dues is for for leveraging federal resources. So every dollar in member dues gets us $8.67 in direct federal funding. This is primarily the transportation funding for UPWP, but it also includes Homeland Security dollars and the CASP system. So the next slide is that where we also talked about, this is also the only support that certain programs have. About 16% of COG member dues support programs that don't really have any other funding. That would be the health planning, the housing opportunities, and the regional incident command system. So that's about $875,000 to support those programs. So you will see that the housing opportunities does have some funding, and that's primarily the Amazon money that you'll see in that $700,000 number. The vast majority of which is just given right back out the door, the $500,000 a year or so of that. So we are able, with that work, we've been able to generate some interest in helping support the program. But the take that we have on that is very small, and it's not really supporting all of the other housing opportunity work that's going on in the region. On the next slide, you'll see that 31% of member dues is used to leverage additional resources. So this includes programs supported by regional funds, and this $1.7 million leverages an additional $9 million in funding. The final way, the 4th way that we use member dues is to support additional member services, benefits, outreach, and forums. So this would be like IRE, it would be the executive office and member relations office. It would be of communications. And also it used to be that we had to support cooperative purchasing with some from member due program dollars, but we have in the last 3 years managed to get that program self-sufficient, and actually it's generated some dollars for COG to use, and those are considered general fund dollars, and I'm sure you're familiar with those. Are the best kind to have because you can use them on other things. And so currently one of the things that's not listed on here that member dues is supporting is the DMV Moves project, because that was started in last fiscal year. There wasn't necessarily a certain funding source, and so we were able to start funding some of that work with member dues while that's all being ironed out, and it continues into this year. On the next slide, as you know, Clark alluded to, the increase in total from FY25 is about a 5% increase. So this will result in an additional $265,000 in members dues. And so for reference, that was a 4.32% or $220,000 increase in the prior fiscal year. So the population increase was 0.76% this year. Prior year is 0.42%. So a little improvement on the population side, and that's what's driving the overall 5% increase. So the proposed structure is to move the cap and the increase for any member jurisdiction to 10%. It was 9% last year, and we have increased the rate by 3 pennies to 84.5 cents from 84.5 cents to 87.5 cents, or 3.55 increase in the assessment rates. So this basis for this increase is that we have had seen additional funds for transportation funding, the 2 million, which was requiring a additional $200,000 match on an annual basis. And we've been trying to grow into that for the last couple of years, but also general cost increases across programs. Some of our contracts during highly inflationary times were locked in at great rates. As they're coming up for renewal, we're still seeing sort of the lag in cost increases still coming through. And so we're still, although inflation seems to have been tamed to some degree, we are now in the catch-up phase with some of our contracts that we are having to renew. On the next slide, you will see the detail by jurisdiction. And I'm going to pause here for any questions before we get into the regional funds.
Thanks, Ms. Messag. Let's see if there are any questions. It might actually be helpful if I do it by jurisdiction. That way, if anybody's got a question here. So how about any questions from Maryland? Any questions from Virginia? And how about the District of Columbia? All right, I don't hear any questions this time. As a reminder for folks, once we get through this, I'll make a motion to put the resolution kind of before us, and then we'll also have a chance for discussion and questions in as well.
Okay, so moving on to the regional funds. First, we'll discuss the regional water and environmental funds. Next slide. The regional water and environmental funds will follow the same 5% increase as member dues as we've done it in the past. So that would provide an additional moving from increase of $89,000 for the regional water fund and a $43,000 increase in the regional environmental fund. These funds provide administrative, technical, and legal support for the Blue Plains Intermunicipal Agreement. They also represent the region in the Chesapeake Bay program, support local stormwater management programs in compliance with stormwater permits. They assist water utilities and local governments with assessing and implementing water supply and resiliency and security measures, including regional source water protection plans. They manage the region's mutual aid water and wastewater agency response network. They run the community engagement campaign, which includes regional messaging like Protect Your Pipes. And probably what you've seen most lately is the water supply and drought awareness responsiveness plan. And as a reminder, on the regional water fund, 2/3 of that is actually paid by the water and sewer utilities rather than the member jurisdictions. So moving to the next fund is our Regional Public Safety Fund. This is also following a 5% increase over the prior year. This region, which will be a $31,000 increase in the fund overall. So these funds go towards supporting ongoing mutual aid updates with federal partners, including the Capitol Police, National Security Council, and the police chiefs, future regional leadership training programs. It continuing to develop the regional crime dashboard, and it also supports 9 public safety programs that are used day to day by your public safety officials. And the next slide is the Regional Farm Fund, Food and Agriculture Regional Member Fund. So this fund is also following the same pattern. It was created in 2023 to address food insecurity and issues in the region. So this was, the fee is based on program budget needs and based on the population, with a maximum of $39,899 for a large jurisdiction and a flat fee of $2,849 for jurisdiction with a population under 51,000. This is similar to the way the public safety fee is structured. The Farm Committee and Fund support development of long-term regional direction and collaboration toward a more resilient, secure, equitable, connected food farm economy across the region. Current grant project work experience from COVID-19 demonstrated catastrophic events can significantly disrupt flow of food to the metropolitan Washington region. They also create increased demand for government assistance and assistance organizations at a time when overall supplies are constrained. And this demand grew in 23 and is expected to continue to grow at a high level, which I think we've all seen in the last food insecurity report coming out from the Capital Food Region. COG strives to leverage external funding to complement these members' investments and to increase capacity and accelerate action. For example, work from the Farm Committee contributed to knowledge gain throughout regional FEMA catastrophic preparedness grant program projects, strengthening regional capabilities, and supports logistics and supply chain management related to food and water, and support development of tools and capabilities to help all regional partners better prepare to meet food and water needs during a disaster or any emergency event. At this point, we'll go to the next slide, and I will turn it back to Clark for any closing comments.
Thanks, Julie. No, let's certainly open up to questions. I'd like to hear from members if we have any.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Mussog, for the presentation too. So let me do this. What I'm going to do is first make a motion to approve the resolution, get a second. That's going to put it on the floor. Then I'm going to turn and see if there's questions from board members so that folks can make sure we have plenty of time to do that. So let me make a motion to approve resolution R26, 2024. And is there a second?
Second, Denise Mitchell, College Park.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for the second. Okay, so we have a motion and a second, so now it's on the floor. So now let me turn to see if there's any discussion or questions that folks have. Just to kind of manage the flow in case there's a lot of hands that go up, why don't I do it again by jurisdiction? So let me turn first and see if there's any questions or comments from our members in Maryland. I hear a dog barking, but maybe not a question. Next, let me turn then to any questions or comments from board members in Virginia. Mr. Snyder, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to underscore the amazing work that COG does that we're all paying for. I particularly want to call attention to the amazing improvement in air quality that's available in our materials, and also point out that the Emergency Preparedness Council is sponsoring an event on disinformation and combating disinformation on October 22. Just another example of the incredible breadth of COG's work. So I'm very pleased to support this funding. I can't imagine this region without the Council of Governments. Thank you.
I certainly second that comment. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other comments from Virginia? All right, let me turn to comments and questions. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chair, sorry, Libby Garvey. I thought I put my hand up, but I'm having trouble with WebEx.
No problem.
Okay, I will third the comments from Mr. Snyder. Absolutely agree. And I would just like to invite Randy to talk just a little bit more about the sort of bulk purchasing and coming together, because I have long thought that's an area where we should be doing more. I'm really pleased to hear that discussion, and just wonder if he wants to elaborate a little bit more on that. I think it's huge.
And I think she meant Clark.
I did. What did I say? I never know. Never mind what I said.
Randy's Wamata. They share. They've got there's a little similarity.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
Clear. I am not asking for an $800 million shortfall to be cleared up in the budget. So very different scope of what I'm asking. Chair Garvey, I will send you material on this program, and that will list all of the materials where we have contracts for the region, and then link you up with Charles Felton, who runs our procurement shop. Arlington uses the program quite well, particularly through Scott Bos's.
I'm aware. Yeah. I'm aware, and thank you for sending. And I'll run it out. I just know our manager has talked about some other areas that he thinks we could be doing more, and I will talk it over with him. I just want to say thank you, and probably we need to be doing some more.
Yeah, and like I said, thank you for the remarks. And it's a little bit on both of our ends. It's a little bit of us doing a better job of sharing with all of your staffs what we do, and then it's a little bit of procurement folks being willing to say, okay, I don't need to procure widget X out of the county. I can use the COG contract. And oftentimes there's, some boundary issues there. Giving up something can sometimes be perceived as a loss. And so sometimes it's a little cultural, and working with our elected officials is probably the key to unlocking that.
And actually, I totally agree. I'm glad you said that. And that's where COG here and the board of directors could really work more, I think. So maybe we could do some, I don't know, case studies or some particularly knotty problems that we could maybe kind of break through here as a group, possibly. Just suggest that.
I'll take it as a do out and we can brainstorm for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bailey, I saw your
Clark
hand
or
up.
Mr. Clark or whoever you are. Thank you.
Who is that guy?
Ms. Bailey, I
Yeah.
see your hand up. Let me turn to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Ditto and what Mr. Snyder and Libby said, I really, really appreciate it. And Clark, I really appreciate your willingness to stretch them even further. I would sincerely invite you on the screen and off the screen to come to Prince William and tell your story because of the value of what we do, and to help us collectively all across the region understand and appreciate the value of what we do. I like the tweaks that you've made in helping us to have more transparency in the budget cycle. I think that's essential as well as we grow in the region. And so I really, really do appreciate the more of the transparency and how you include us in the decision as it relates to the budget. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bailey. All right, let me see if there are any questions or comments from our board members in the District of Columbia. All right, not hearing or seeing any. So seeing no more comments, let me now call for a vote to approve Resolution R27, 2024. And remember, we're calling for abstentions and nays. So are there any abstentions or nay votes? Not seeing or hearing any. That means that the motion passes. Thank you all very much. We're a little behind schedule. So, oh, you know what? I apologize. I read the wrong number. That should have been Resolution R26, 2024. So apologies there. Let me do that over just to make sure I did it correctly. So are there any abstentions or nays for R26, 2024? All right, hearing none, then the measure passes. I got ahead of myself. All right, next, let me turn to agenda item number 8 now, which is approval of the fiscal year 2025 and 5-year capital expenditure plan and budget. So I'm going to turn back to Ms. Mussog, as well as our COG Secretary Treasurer, Mayor Michael O'Connor, who will brief the board on the proposed FY 2025 capital expenditure budget and our 5-year capital expenditure plan. Following the presentation, the board will be asked to adopt Resolution 27, 2024, as recommended by COG's Budget and Finance Committee. So Mayor O'Connor, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Good afternoon, everyone. The fiscal year 2025-2029 capital plan document and cover memo are included in the packet on page 44. This was reviewed by the Budget and Finance Committee on September 20th and unanimously approved to move forward to the full board for a vote. I'll turn it over to Ms. Mussog for her to provide additional details and answer the hard questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor O'Connor. COG presents a 5-year capital plan annually to the Budget and Finance Committee and Board of Directors for approval of current year capital expenditures, and then a preview of expected expenditures for the next 4 years. COG has a board designated capital expenditure reserve that is used for the purchase of long-term assets, and it's replenished over time through the allocation of depreciation expense to COG's various funding sources. In the FY 25 to 29 capital plan proposed is to expend in FY 25, $10.7 million and a total of $11 million in expenditures over the next 5 years. $10.4 million of which is for the office remodel. On page 4 of the plan, and I think that would be page 48 in your budget book, this details the expenditures for FY 25 in the amount of $10.7 million. The expenses are for equipment and IT expenses, leasehold improvements, and furniture. $10.4 million is for space planning, design, admin management, leasehold improvements, and furniture and fixtures related to the delayed office remodel. We have $50,000 for some network upgrades, another $50,000 for the final phase of the document management system. This will conclude the 3-year project where the bulk of our documents stored offsite were converted to digital storage and will result in significant reduction of our off-site storage expenses, which was about $15,000 a year. And then an additional $50,000 for routine replacement of IT assets such as laptops and other peripherals. Page 5 and 6 of the plan show the projected 5-year capital expenditure plan. And then page 7 is the summary and forecast of the balance of the capital expenditure reserve as of June 30th, 2025, which is estimated at $242,600. And this is after a $1.3 million transfer to the reserve from undesignated fund balance and a $3 million loan to help fund the office renovation. Approval of this plan authorizes expenditures of $10.75 million in the FY25 year for the assets described. The expenses noted in FY26 through 29 are presented for planning purposes. These expenditures will be reviewed, modified, and presented to the Budget and Finance Committee and Board of Directors in subsequent fiscal years for final approval. And I want to note the current budget in there for the building build out is still being massaged. This is the high end of it as we are working through and trying to have some cost containment efforts while realizing that the costs will fluctuate as we are in the process of trying to get to the final end stage. So we are comfortable that this is what we need to ask for, and we are hopeful that we will not need to use all of it for the renovation. And for those of you that have not listened to this for the last 5 years that I've done it, this is the long delayed office remodel discussion that probably started about 10 years ago. Our offices were built, this office was opened in 1990, and there has not been a significant and comprehensive remodel of this space since we opened. There's sort of been some patchwork and carpet replaced here and there, not everywhere, paint, some furniture, but really we're at the end point of use with a lot of this, and we are looking towards a complete and substantial overhaul of both the second and the third floor sometime in the early spring of 25. I will pause here and ask if there are any questions before I turn it back to Mayor O'Connor.
Can we, just for the flow here, if it's okay, Ms. Mussock, can we, unless Mayor O'Connor, if you've got something more to really add, can we conclude this part of it so I can then put the motion before us and then make sure we open up for questions at that time?
Sure.
Okay.
I have nothing to add, but I'm happy to make the motion to approve resolution 27-2024.
I'm happy to second it, Supervisor Bailey.
Excellent. Okay, so we have the measure that has been motioned and seconded. Now let's turn to discussion. I think I saw Ms. Bailey put her hand up, so let me turn to Ms. Bailey.
Yes, real quick. Julie, does that mean we're going to get rid of those curtains?
Yeah, well, the curtains have been replaced in the boardroom. They're now lovely, actual workable blinds that go up and down, so you can actually have some light there. But yes, they were pretty dusty when we pulled them down.
I'm sure. Any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing or hearing any others. All right, so with that, then let me now call for a vote to approve resolution 27-2024. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? So hearing none, that means that the motion passes. So thank you very much. I appreciate both of you. All right, we're going to move on now to agenda item number 9, which is our Regional Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Implementation, or REVI plan. So the board is going to be briefed by our COG Deputy Director of Metropolitan Planning, Kanti Srikanth, on TPB and COG's jointly developed REVI plan, a guide to help our state and local jurisdictions plan and implement electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the region to support the transition of light-duty vehicles to electric power. This is a presentation. This is not, there's not going to be a motion in front of anybody. What I would like for us to do, though, is make sure that as we turn it over for discussion, part of my kind of charge to the COG staff was, how do we take this type of briefing to actually turn into some type of action, local action? And so as we turn to that discussion after the presentation, hopefully we can talk a little bit about maybe what some of our different jurisdictions are or can be doing in that. But Mr. Srikanth, let me turn it over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Allen and members of the board. I'm joined by COG's Climate Energy and Air Program Director, Jeff King, today. To share with you the results of the study that Mr. Allen just noted that the TPP did in collaboration with COG Climate and GPS program.
Mr. Srikanth, I apologize for interrupting. I don't know if it's me, but I'm having difficulty hearing. It almost sounds a little choppy. I'm not sure if anybody else is hearing that as well.
Okay, is this any better?
It's a little better. We'll try to get, yeah.
Okay, I'll try to speak loudly. We see the study as providing a regional level strategy to help the efforts of your agencies that are already engaged in building a robust network for EV charging stations. Next.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. It sounds like a very choppy kind of connection there on the audio.
Sounding choppy to me as well.
Fine.
Auntie, is there a different microphone you can select?
I will try.
Is it any better?
That sounds much better. Can you say something else real fast?
Okay.
There we go.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. I apologize for the technology problems there. So, this report, the report from this study is titled the Regional EV Infrastructure Implementation Strategy. Members can access this report on the COG Electric Vehicle Clearinghouse webpage. There are two main takeaways that I would like to highlight and share with members. The first is an estimate of the number of EV charging stations this region would need. And second, a preliminary identification of potential locations within each of your jurisdictions to consider placing these publicly accessible EV charging stations. Next. So why this study? Why these findings? Why now? Well, COG has adopted a multi-sectoral greenhouse gas reduction goal, and the TPB has also adopted a greenhouse gas reduction goals explicitly for on-road vehicles. And transitioning our vehicles in our region from current fossil fuel to clean fuel is a very important and one of the most potent ways of the region achieving its greenhouse gas reduction goals. Next. So before COG and the TPB adopted its greenhouse gas reduction goals, particularly the near-term one, the 2030 goal, it did examine a number of specific ways the region could achieve its goals. And as you can see in this chart, electric zero emission vehicles, and electric vehicles is a zero emissions vehicle. That is the third most potent strategy to achieve greenhouse gas reductions when you look at all sectors. When you look at just the transportation sector, electric vehicles or clean fuel vehicles, zero emission vehicles is the #1 strategy to reduce the most amount of greenhouse gas reductions. Next. So one of the things that this graph shows is the region and the residents and the vehicle owners in the region have been very quick to purchasing and transitioning to electric vehicles, as you can see in the chart here. That's the blue graphs. What is also shown as an orange line there is the number of publicly accessible charging stations in our region. And you can clearly see that the provision of this EV charging infrastructure is not quite keeping pace with the growth of the electric vehicles in our region. Next. And another reason for calling attention to this effort now is the availability of significant amount of federal funding that members can tap into. all of your agencies are spending significant amount of local funds to do this. And it's a great opportunity to leverage that funding to access additional and significant amounts of federal funding. Yeah, federal funds are competitive grants, but we believe that a grant application that is able to show that the request for a grant is part of a larger collaborative regional effort to make the National Capital Region EV ready will make for a compelling case to win the grant. As you can see, just in the first 3 line items, those are all brand new programs that the federal government enacted with its bipartisan infrastructure law. There is $7.5 billion. All of that is for electric vehicle infrastructure. And then there are additional, there's about a $5.6 billion in a continuing program through the FTA, low or no emission for buses. There's an additional $5 billion just for school bus programs. So there's a lot of money, but we need to move on a coordinated and a regional plan using a regional strategy. Next. So here is the first result or the first takeaway from this study. And that is the number of electric vehicle charging stations this region will need to build by time periods. We have 2030, which is just 6 years away, 2035, and I'll mention why 2035 in just a minute, and then 2045, which is our longer term, right? So obviously, this number or the number of EV charging stations the region will need will depend on the number of electric vehicles we anticipate the region having. And there are a couple different ways of developing that estimate. You can look at the past few years of how many electric vehicles are being purchased, how many are being registered in our region, and you can project that. If the same rate of growth happens, where might we be in these future years? And then there's another way of doing it, and that is looking at the current laws or the policies that the 3 states, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, have adopted. By that I mean all 3 states have currently said or adopted Advanced Clean Car 2 rule, which essentially calls for increasing number of electric vehicle sales. All new vehicles sold, a percentage of them should be electric vehicles, and that is a gradually increasing number. And by 2035, these rules calls for 100% of new vehicles being sold to be electric vehicles. So that is a very high growth. So these 3 lines on this bar graph are depicting those 3 scenarios. The one at the bottom is the recent trend, which is the low adaptation. And the one at the top, the red line, is what happens if the Advanced Clean Car rule stays in place and if we hit the target of 100% of the new vehicle sales being EV by 2035. As you can see, the bars are very steep. We are estimated to go from 82,000 electric vehicles today to millions of electric vehicles in the future. Under the low scenario, by 2030, in the next 6 years, our estimate shows that there could be a 5-fold growth in electric vehicles. And under a high scenario, there could be 11-fold growth in electric vehicles in the region. All of that is what will allow us to reach or to receive a significant amount of reduction in greenhouse gases. But that might be challenged if there isn't a good supportive regional network of charging stations. Next. So this is a table essentially listing those numbers that you saw on the bar graph, but there are broadly 2 types of charging equipment that is used today. One is called the level 2, and the other one is the DC fast charger. The level 2 takes more time to fully charge a vehicle, and the DC fast charger does it the fastest. So this is an estimate from this study of how many of these two types of charging stations this region would need to match the growth in vehicles in our region between now and 2045. Next, please. So now that we have shared with you the significant number of EV charging stations we might need, the question then becomes, where might we want to build these? Obviously, it needs to be across the region, cover a variety of land uses, cover a variety of places where vehicles are traveling. So there are different ways of determining the best location. There's no one way, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It depends on what objective we may want to achieve or we may want to focus on. One is we may want to prioritize building direct current fast chargers with multifamily housing in focus, or we could prioritize building level 2 charging stations with areas particularly where we want to focus on equity, or we can prioritize locations where there's a lot of traffic, lot of demand, and therefore put our fast charging at those locations. In reality, most localities will likely end up with a mix of these three, or maybe even a fourth or a fifth way to prioritize their plans and their investments. And many of you currently have EV plans and EV operational plans. So this is reflecting on all of those different ways to optimize, and we have simplified it under these three buckets. Next, please. In identifying whichever way you prioritize, whether you want to prioritize building, you want to prioritize multifamily housing, or you want to prioritize high traffic areas, there are a number of factors to consider. Obviously, what is the level of traffic that will be coming there? Multifamily homes, which are known to have significant challenges in having charging capability to each house, at each house. Or what kind of land use is there? We already have been building electric charging stations in the region. So is there an existing infrastructure there? And obviously equity emphasis area. So there are different considerations that we have used in coming up with this potential preliminary locations. Next, please. And so there are three scenarios, and we have ended up with developing three maps. And as you can see, the figure on the top, the black area shows a large tract of land, and the image beneath that shows individual parcels. The parcels were examined and scored based on the factors that I just went over. What is the level of traffic? What type of site characteristics exist there? Is it a park and ride lot? Is it a multifamily housing? Is it an equity emphasis areas? And the scores will decrease if there is an existing charging station. So that was the methodology we used. It's not perfect, but it tries to accommodate different considerations and have a quantitative approach to identifying some priority locations. And all of this has been prepared and provided to you in a map, and there's a link on the slide that you can access the map. And in the map, when you look at the parcels, a red parcel indicates it got a high score, and a blue parcel indicates a lower score. But it's very important to note that this methodology was applied at a regional level. This means that the locations that are identified, whether it's in red or blue, is to serve simply as a starting point for your agencies to look at, and then work with your own planning staff to match them with the ground level knowledge and to decide if indeed this parcel is the best place. And if it is, what type of charger is best situated there? Is it level 2 or DC fast charging? So this is some information that we have. This is the second piece of information that this study has generated. Next, please. And finally, what we have done, even though this is a regional study and these forecasts are at the regional level, it was built from the ground up, which allowed us to provide or generate what we are calling regional profiles or jurisdictional profiles. So this is just an example. I've chose Charles County. The number of projected EV charging stations that I shared with you earlier under 3 different scenarios, the low adaptation rate, medium adaptation rate, high adaptation rate, we have provided those estimates at individual jurisdictional level. And we have also provided, next slide, the potential locations within those jurisdictions that could be considered for a more detailed site assessment. And you have these jurisdictional profiles in the report. Next, please. So those are the 3 things that this study has generated. Now, ways we believe that this report, these findings can be used, obviously to assess the EV growth scenarios against your own local climate and EV goals and targets so that it can inform the efforts that are needed to secure the resources to implement this. And we definitely want to acknowledge and recognize that there is a context for these potential EV charging site locations that are identified. Because these are at regional level, it will still need a local level detailed site assessment, which you could undertake working with your planning staff who are the most knowledgeable about local conditions. And another important way, earlier I mentioned about all of the federal funding that is available for federal grants. The states, of the $7.5 billion in new funding I mentioned, $5 billion is formula funds, meaning $5 billion is distributed to each state by the federal government according to a formula. So all of your state DOTs will be receiving $5 billion of distributed money over a 5-year period. So there are opportunities to seek those funding as well. One of the things that we want to acknowledge and recognize is all of you and your agencies have been very active in pursuing these grants. A staff most recent survey of what grants had been achieved or received in this region, we tabulated about $200 million in federal grants that was secured by COG jurisdictions and agencies. And also the state DOTs I talked about having funding over FY 2022, 23, and 2024, the state DOTs have about $120 million programmed in each of those 3 fiscal years. So there is significant amount of funding that is available. We trust that this report, these findings would serve as a blueprint, as a resource for jurisdictions' efforts to secure the resources because time is short. 2030 is 6 years away, and our greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2030 is significant. We are hoping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 2005 levels in the next 6 years. And electric vehicles is an important part of that strategy. Next, that concludes what I had to say, but I also want to acknowledge, Mr. Chairman, that there are a number of our colleagues who really worked on this. Erin Morrow, Dushan, Vuxan, Maya, Christopher, and a number of other COG staff. And we are also supported ably with all the methodology by a consulting company, ICF. And we have ICF's consulting person who worked on this also to answer the tougher questions now that I hope I've done a reasonably good job selling the product. So with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srikanth. I appreciate that, and to everybody else you mentioned as well as part of this. We are a little behind our schedule, but I don't want to cut short an opportunity here for some questions and discussion. So I would just ask us, though, in our questions and comments to remember to keep them somewhat brief since we're a little behind schedule. I kind of teed this up at the beginning. I think this is an outstanding report and presentation. I think our challenge is, so what do we do with it? So it's one thing to show us, that EV adoption is going to be going up, whether you're looking at your high adoption model or your low adoption model. It's another for us to think about what are the policies that we as elected leaders and policymakers can put into place to actually achieve it. It's one thing to show a location where we know we need EV charging infrastructure, but another thing for us to think about what are the policies that we need to change to allow that to happen. In the district, we actually are moving legislation through the council right now that'll broadly and greatly expand our ability to put in our EV charging infrastructure. A couple of things that we learned along the way, and Conti, here's kind of my question is, does this presentation kind of hit on these issues, or is this a launching pad, you think, to then dig deeper? For example, we looked at our goals around new multifamily construction, for example, and making sure that if a parking garage is being built, how do we ensure and require a certain number of those spots have to be EV charging ready? We looked at things like condo and co-ops where there's shared common spaces, which actually greatly inhibit the ability to put in EV charging infrastructure because it's a challenge to be able to work through those types of ownership structures. We have made a lot of changes. We worked really closely with our Department of Energy and Environment, our Department of Transportation, with groups like our AOBA, our Apartment and Office Building Association, to kind of come up with a bill that I think is going to dramatically expand the expectations, but it tried to deal and try to tackle some of those thorny issues so that we can find the spot that needs more EV infrastructure. We can see the need, but we actually don't have the policies in place to actually make it happen. Does this presentation report dig into that, or how do you see this as a launching pad to then help local jurisdictions be able to actually make the changes that we all need to do at the city, county, and state level?
Now, that's a good question. This report does not get into how best the local implementation strategy can be developed. We are hoping COG has a EV clearinghouse where there is a guidance on policy development. This report, I hope, or we hope, would help the development of such policy. For example, as to use the district's example that you cited, Mr. Allen, if you are already looking at development permits or applications or approvals at any kind of housing unit and looking at how do we accommodate electric vehicle charging there, we hope that the jurisdictional profile here will help understand what might be the number of EV charging stations that your jurisdiction may want to have. And then all those three different policy objectives or priorities is something that local jurisdictions can build on. Okay, I need to have 5,000 electric vehicle charging stations in the next 5 years. And looking at my local land use, looking at my market here, these are some of the locations. I do want to emphasize equity areas. So what does this study tell me? What are some of the locations? Or I have a multifamily development coming up. What does this study tell me? Is that an optimum location? So we are hoping that both the number and the preliminary identification of location allows the localities to use that as part of their implementation plan or a broader policy towards providing any kind of relief that might be needed to build this infrastructure.
Okay.
The DC fast charging costs a significant amount of funding, but also is dependent on the electric grid and its capacity. That might also be an area where localities could look at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think for all of us that are elected leaders, policymakers, I think it's again, there are actually a lot of policy barriers to that implementation that many of us may not even be aware of yet. There are solutions out there. And I think for us to really take the incredible work that this report has put forward, that could be a next step and should be a next step for us to all then think through what are the different implementation policy changes that frankly we're going to have to make and make them relatively quickly to hit those goals. Let me turn to comments or questions from other colleagues too. I'll do it in reverse order I did last time. So are there any other board members from the District of Columbia that had a question or comment? Not seeing any, so let me turn to colleagues from Virginia.
Did you hear anything from me, Adams?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch all the different hands I see going up right now. The District of Columbia, Mr. Adams? All right, let me go to Virginia then.
This is Mayor Adams.
Okay, Mayor Adams then, let me turn to you.
In Maryland.
Okay, sorry, I was going to go to Virginia first since I started with Maryland first last time.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just trying to spread it out. Let's see. I think I see a couple of different hands up. I also think I see some hands from Maryland that are up as well right now. Mr. Snyder, let me see you.
Sure, thanks very much. I would second your comments, Mr. Chairman, about the next step being best practices and looking at policies that can be effective. So hopefully we can follow up on that through COG. I also had a question about whether the state of Virginia has been as forward-thinking as DC and Maryland in terms of freeing up money and encouraging the creation of EV charging stations. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Next, let me turn to Supervisor Lusk. I think you may still be muted, though.
This is terrible. I should know how to turn the mute button off. I was going to say I want to also acknowledge the great presentation that Conti's provided and note that in Fairfax we do have a Charge Up Fairfax program, but I want to give Conti some credit here in thinking about the equity emphasis areas, and I think that's an area that we're going to need to maybe do a little more work, particularly in Fairfax, but just looking at ways that we can support not just the associations that are looking to provide these charging stations for their residents, but then also those that are in these communities where it's not as easy for them to afford or be able to provide this infrastructure. So I just wanted to make that comment and look forward to continuing this discussion and looking for ways to address it in those particular communities. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chair Garvey, let me turn to you next.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I can't see anything here. Okay.
Again.
So I absolutely agree with the equity. I think that's really important. And this may sound like it's not equitable, but I'm wondering if there are ways of, are there ways that we could be supporting, encouraging, kind of goosing individual homeowners who do have the money to do this on their own? In other words, and we don't pay for it. It just gets more chargers around so that then the public chargers are not being used as much by people who can afford to do it at home. And I wonder if there's some things that we can do to sort of encourage that, and whether there's some barriers on that. I'm not sure. But I thought I would toss that one out there, because it seems to me on the private side, the more people have it at their own homes, the more it frees up the public ones for folks that don't.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks, Chair Garvey. I'll just add real fast for the DC legislation that's moving through, for example, there's many people who are going to be parking at home on a private lot. They don't need a fast charger because they'll be charging overnight. So they really need more like a level 1, maybe a level 2. And the legislation requires for all new single family home construction or substantial rehabilitation has to have essentially an electrical outlet outside, which would at least make it so that level 1 could happen. And we're talking about the normal electrical socket, right? Level 1 is a regular electrical socket. Level 2 is more like a washer dryer kind of connection. So those are some of the policies we've looked at, but I kind of hear an appetite from a lot of colleagues to try to think about how we work on this on a policy and legislative wise to see what fits each jurisdiction, but what are some ideas there?
Yeah, and it could be Virginia may need help. I don't know if we're a different state. I don't know if we're allowed to do that or not, make that requirement or not. So
Yeah.
I'm ignorant. Thank you. It's important discussion. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me turn to some of our Maryland colleagues. So Mayor Adams, let me turn to you.
Yes, again, thank you so very much for the presentation. That was great. My question goes to, as we move forward with some of these things, is it available for some of the expertise within COG to assist the local jurisdictions on trying to move forward as well, outside of what we do with the state?
Yes, I can. I'll invite Jeff King, our climate energy program director, because we do have technical assistance that COG member jurisdictions are availing themselves of.
Yeah, so couple points. One, we do have a regional electric vehicle working group, so all, at least executive agency staff, participate regularly in that. So there's a certain opportunity there to share resources and technical support to your staff. One idea that came up as I listened to this is I think there is an opportunity perhaps to also convene with the legislative staff, because we just, for instance, got a request last week from Prince George's County asking very similar questions to what Charles Allen was talking about related to requirements for multifamily, et cetera. We also have an on-call set of 6 consulting firms that have engineering capabilities, all sorts of different technical capabilities that many of our COG member jurisdictions are availing themselves of through either writing the contract directly or going through COG to get to these consultant teams. I know, for instance, we were active in Prince George's County, Frederick County, Falls Church, Loudoun, and just actually got a request this week from the city of Bowie. So related to some sustainability planning needs. So certainly happy to help connect you to those resources as needed.
Not oversimplifying it or whatever, but who do we reach out to?
The lead staff on our side is Robert Christopher and Maya Davis. I can put their emails in the chat.
Okay.
Jeff, why don't we have as a due out Monica as our liaison here? She'll link up the staff with you, Mayor, and we'll make sure that we follow up.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mayor Adams. Let me turn to Vice Chair Collins, and then we'll go to Mayor Ashton, and then after that, we'll move to our next agenda item.
Thank you, Chair Allen. And first off, I want to thank the staff for recognizing Charles County in the presentation, because I think a lot of the challenges that exist in total implementation are really centered in jurisdictions such as Charles County. When you look at our equity emphasis areas, they tend to be in the more rural locations in the county, and that creates challenges just in terms of where you actually put these EV centers. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about areas in the county that, in terms of location, they're, extended away from, our more heavily populated areas. But you can certainly argue this is where the need is more than any place else. And so I know that needs to be something to be considered when we look at total implementation. And I think the other point I wanted to make, this issue more than any other issue is another example of why this upcoming election is so critical, as it relates to policy. Because ensuring that total implementation of our goals, as a regional body are in place, ensuring that the resources coming from the federal government are in place, is really a testament to this as a potential issue when we look at this upcoming election. And so I just wanted to, first off, thank staff for recognizing Charles County as, one of the counties that I think when we look at how we move forward, this is a perfect example of the many challenges, but at the same time, also understanding that at the end of the day, full implementation will require additional resources and, quite frankly, policy that recognizes the importance of this. And we need to ensure that we continue to move forward with, the ideas that we put in place, with the thinking at the very beginning of this particular project. And so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mayor Ashton, we'll let you have the last comment or question, then we'll move to our next agenda item.
Thank you. Yeah, I will not repeat everything everyone said, but City of Rockville has been moving very quickly on our planning efforts, as well as different types of policies and implementation efforts. We also have an EV plan that we have out for public engagement at this time. We look at it as an equity issue, an environment issue, but also an economic development issue. We see that if people can come charge in our city, then that might bring additional folks who might also shop in our shops. So but I wanted to echo the comments on the policies, and I was wondering if we might have a policy playbook or even ideas that we can just pull from and just easily access. I believe the National League of Cities did something like this with housing, and so that's one request. The second is as we look at how we're going to get this done, I think similar to housing again, as we set goals that we then all agree to the goals for our jurisdictions, as well as track them over time so that we're holding ourselves accountable and can see how we're progressing. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Love that idea of a policy playbook. And I think that's how we take a lot of these fantastic presentations and information that we get, then be able to figure out how we turn it into action. So I appreciate that. From a timing perspective, I need us to move on to our next agenda item, but I know this created a lot of great discussion and questions. I know that Mr. Shrikant, Jeff King, and everybody is there. If you have any additional questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat, and that way the COG staff can grab it and follow up with you as well. So let me move to our next agenda item. It's going to be agenda item number 10, which is Housing Affordability Planning Program Grants. This is also known as HAP. The program is funded by a grant from the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. It's established to award small, flexible grants to area local governments and nonprofit developers engaged in the planning, approval, or development of housing near transit stations. Today, we're going to be approving the recommendations of the selection panel for the 2024 funding cycle. So let's first hear from our COG Housing Program Manager, Hillary Chapman, on the recommended 2024 recipients. Ms. Chapman, let me turn it to you.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Allen, Vice Chairs Luskin Collins, and members of the board. I know we are really pressed for time, and I want to make sure we have an ability to hear from our next presenter. So I'm going to ask for your understanding in condensing this presentation into about 2 slides and refer you to our packet for more information, just to sort of help move us along efficiently. So if I could ask me to go to the next. I think everyone is familiar with, this is our 3rd round of grants. And I'm very happy to share that we have, we were highly oversubscribed this year. We had 3 times the amount of requests for funding than funds available. Total amount of funding that was available was $500,000. You go to the next slide. And the next slide, here's the punchline. So I'm going to, instead of giving you sort of an overview of each of the recommended grantees, I'll just give you a couple quick highlights so that we can try to get some time back. We have 8 total grantees, 4 from local governments and 4 from nonprofit developers. This is the most number of local government applicants that we have ever received for this program. And we were very excited to be able to work with our members to catalyze and bring capacity, excuse me, to their staff to be able to do work that we think will have a long-term impact in our communities. We also have 4 nonprofit developers that are recommended to receive HAP grants. And this year, the technical selection panel felt it was very important to support opportunities for affordable homeownership. So you will see 2 of those developer partners, Amana Inc. and L'Enfant Trust, are affordable homeownership developments. We also have 2 other development proposals of interest. One that's supporting for veterans exiting homelessness, and a partnership between affordable housing and a Goodwill store, and also some really, I think, catalytic studies and that will be important in our local communities in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So with that, I am going to conclude and say there is in your packet, you should have a memo with a description of each of the recommended grantees. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to ask them, but I'm going to skip over the description of each of these proposals in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chapman. And that's not to give short shrift to any of the descriptions. They're in our packet, so please take a look and read through them. I think that'll be helpful for everybody. But why don't I do this? I'm going to make a motion to approve Resolution 28-2024, and that'll put it on the table, and if we can have any questions or comments at that time. So do I have a second for the motion to approve the Resolution 28-2024?
Second, Supervisor Bailey.
Thank you, Supervisor Bailey. So we have a motion and a second. So now let me turn to see if there's any discussion or questions. How about we do like we did last time, round robin? So let me start with any members from Maryland. Any members from Virginia? And any from the District of Columbia? All right, not seeing or hearing any. So let me now then call for a vote to approve Resolution 28-2024. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? And I'm not hearing any, so that means that our motion passes. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Ms. Chapman.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So that leaves us time, absolutely, to get to agenda item number 11, which is our Capital Area Food Bank 2024 Hunger Report. So our CEO, Radha Mathia, and correct me if I mispronounce that, please, and the Capital Area Food Bank Director of Strategic Initiatives, Sabrina Tedley, will brief us on the Capital Area Food Bank 2024 Hunger Report. The report highlights food insecurity and hunger challenges in the metropolitan Washington region. Following the presentation, I'm going to ask the board to adopt Resolution R29-2024, which is taking actions to address food insecurity in the region. So with that, let me turn over to Ms. Mathia and Ms. Tedley, and I'll turn over to you for your presentations.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to the COG board and the partnership that we've had with COG for many years now, but with the Farm Committee in particular for this topic. My colleague Sabrina and I will go through this fairly quickly, knowing the time constraints that we have and also allowing for time for conversation and discussion. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see the Hunger Report is something that we have published every year since 2020. And we've really focused on doing this with a key external partner who has expertise in being able to conduct these general population surveys. The general population surveys are important because the results are then ones that can be... I'm sorry, I'm just hearing some feedback. I'm not sure if that's just on my end or others are hearing that as well. Okay, I will continue.
Yeah, I was hearing a slight feedback, but I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Okay, I'll continue. I was saying it's important for these to be general population surveys so that the results can be extrapolated all the way down to the county level and not just at the aggregate DMV level. What we've tried to do here is really gain the insights on who's food insecure, for how often are they food insecure, are there other issues that are the root causes of this food insecurity, and over the years we've added a lot of other questions, whether they're on the health side, the workforce side, to really understand some of the issues, as we know that food security doesn't exist in isolation. And so we'll speak to some of those as well. What's also important is that we wanted this to be data informed and data driven, but also be informed by what those who are experiencing food insecurity are collectively kind of sharing with us as well. And so we have a client leadership council that really talks to a couple dozen individuals throughout the course of the year who are experiencing food insecurity, and they help helped inform many stages of this report, right from the design to the way the questions were asked, to providing a lot of video input to bring some life to some of the numbers that we're sharing in this report as well. As we've done in the past, we are happy to share a lot of this data across many stakeholder groups. So, of course, here with most stakeholders at COG being from governments at different levels across our region, but also with the private sector, nonprofits, and others. And I know that many of your teams, your staff have already reached out to my colleague to have the information be much more tailored for your purposes at various levels at the local or county level. So we're happy to continue to do that. Next slide, please. So we'll jump right into the key finding, which is that food insecurity in the last year has increased across our region. It's at 37%, and that's a 5 percentage point increase from the year prior. So this, of course, is a really staggering number. It's significant. And here I want to explain food insecurity. So a person would have responded, yes, I'm food insecure, if they needed help throughout the course of the year, or even if they needed help at one point during the course of the year. So I do want to make that clear that it is various levels and degrees of food insecurity and various periods during the last year in which they may have needed some support to put nutritionally balanced meal on their tables. So food security has been on the rise here, and fairly significantly. On the next slide, you'll see that it's increased at every single county level as we look at this, not only across the DMV, but across all of our different counties. So what I would say is from a low, quote unquote, of 23% in Arlington, which is still 1 in 4 people who needed some support, to a high across the counties. If we look at Prince George's County, where 1 in 2 needed some additional support this past year. As we look at these numbers compared to where they were the year before, every single county experienced an increase in the number of people who needed support to put food on the table. In the next slide, we really look at why this is the case and what some of the primary drivers of food insecurity are. It will be no surprise to this group that the consistent increase in cost of living, so inflation was number one, if you will. Ongoing employment hardships, where people either were working but weren't working as many hours as they needed to be able to meet all of their ongoing budgetary needs, or the rate of increase in their wages hadn't kept pace with the rate of increase in overall cost of living in the area. We also saw some layoffs amongst those who were working, and you can see that in various industries that really didn't hire people as many hours as they had pre-pandemic. And the last but really important topic here is the loss of pandemic era supports from the government at various levels. And so this past year, when we did the hunger report, that was the first year where all pandemic era benefits had been removed. So whether that was stimulus, additional SNAP benefits, whether it was a moratorium on rents, all of that had been removed, and we saw the implications of that this past year. So that is what has resulted in this combination is what has resulted in the increase that we've seen in food insecurity. On the next slide, you'll see really what trade-offs people had to make. We asked quite a few questions in this area around what did you have to choose in between? And we heard from so many that they had to choose between transportation or food. They had to choose between paying a credit card bill on time or food, paying for rent or mortgage versus food, etc. You see that here. And across the levels of income, we saw the trade-offs had to be made at a fairly significant rate. Now, as we move forward, if we go on to the next slide here, you'll see that we start to understand who's food insecure. So let me translate or share this with my colleague Sabrina here for her to be able to share and provide a little bit more color on exactly who is experiencing some of this food insecurity.
Thank you, Rada. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. I'm talking about this important issue. As Rada mentioned, I will provide a little bit of a double click into some of the demographics of who's experiencing food insecurity, and where I can, I'll compare that to the food secure population, and also where I can, I'll make a comment on how this might be changing over time. We'll start with employment. This is one thing that's not really changing over time and is pretty consistent between the food insecure and food secure populations. We see virtually equivalent employment rates, which really points to the type of jobs that these two populations have access to and the incomes that they have. Next, we take a look at education. One might expect, oh, sorry, could you go back one slide, please? One might expect that the food secure population has an overall higher average level of educational attainment, which is the case. I think what's really notable about the educational attainment of the food insecure population is how large the group is that has a college degree or higher. That's 29%. Another 29% have some college. And this is something that is going up over time, that being the average level of educational attainment with this group. Next slide, please. This is one of the most impactful findings from the report. I'm going to break this down a little bit. Last year, when we did the study, we stratified the population into income deciles and took a look at the prevalence of food insecurity across the income spectrum. And that's the light orange bars. And what we saw was that there were numbers that were pretty high all the way up to the median household income. I want to stress these are household incomes, not individual incomes. Of about $120,000, still 1 in 5 households faced food insecurity at some point in the year prior. But this year, when you put the kind of burnt orange bars next to the light orange bars, you see that the comparative growth from 2023 to 2024 is really sharp in the middle, where you see a 22 to 36% jump or 21 to 31% jump right there at the median, which is telling us that, given all of the economic dynamics Radha reviewed earlier, this is creating a new squeeze higher up the income spectrum than in years past. Next slide, please. Something that very unfortunately does not seem to be changing much year over year is that food insecurity is highly inequitable by race. People of color tend to have rates of food insecurity that are 2 to 3x those of the white population. Next slide, please. And then finally, what I have here is a look at an age cut. We have been able, because of the level of screening that we did on food insecurity, to isolate food insecurity among children and food insecurity among adults over the age of 60. And you can see in the header here, across the region, there are 103,000 food insecure children and 231,000 food insecure seniors in the DMV. And we've also broken that out for you by jurisdiction with the observation that these rates can be a little bit different from the general population rate because we're talking about specific subgroups. And I would just comment that among children, while these rates are significantly lower than the general population rates, that's often because parents are making personal sacrifices to ensure that food insecurity doesn't affect children. I believe that's my last slide, and we're going to shift into talking about some of the solutions that we lift up in the report. So I'll hand it back to Radha.
Thanks, Sabrina. So we've got 5 categories of recommendations here. The first 3 really relate to what governments at different levels can do. And then the others really bring in what others, stakeholders across our community can address. So if we go to the next slide, we focus here on really federal government programs. These won't be a big surprise to you all, but we do really need to maintain and strengthen federal government programs that support food insecurity. So the first and most important, of course, is SNAP. And here we believe that we really need to strengthen SNAP in a couple of different ways. One is that there are far too few individuals who actually need the benefits of this program who right now can qualify for this program. So expanding the qualification criteria for who can benefit from SNAP would be really important. And second, we see really low utilization rates of this program in our regions compared to some other parts of the country. And so we really need to look again at how to make it a little bit easier for those who do qualify to be able to access this program. And we go into that in some detail in the report. Second, we focus on the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And here we really want to ensure that there is a wider diversity of foods being offered through the program to meet the very rich cultural diversity that we see across the DMV, and also ensure that it makes it easier for organizations who are administering TFAP, both at the state level and at the local level, to actually administer this program. Right now, I'll give you an example. We administer this program in many parts of our region, and we only get about 1/3 to perhaps 40% of the funding that we need to administer this program from USDA. The rest of it comes from private sources to be able to actually administer and get this food out to those who need it. And we hear this challenge across the country from others who are implementing the program. And lastly, CSFP is something called the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. It focuses on food for seniors in the area. And right now there is a fairly tremendous burden on implementing this program, and the qualifications vary for who might qualify for this versus Medicare versus SNAP, et cetera. And so if we can just streamline and align those and make those a little easier, there are more people who can actually qualify for these programs that are meant to benefit the appropriate populations. If we go to the next slide, we focus on recommendations that can be adopted at the state level. And here we've got a few examples listed here in terms of sourcing of local foods, increasing the minimum SNAP benefit through state supplements, which has happened in a couple of our states, and Maryland has done that as well. So ensuring that we continue to do that. Ensuring that we have universal school meals, that is so critical. I'm sure you all see it across your schools, and the tremendous benefit that we had during the pandemic when we made it universal, and how that supported so many across the region. And lastly, the support of the expansion of food as medicine programming. I'll just take a few seconds on this to be able to say there is a considerable overlap between those who are suffering from chronic disease in particular and poor health outcomes, and those who are food insecure. And so if we're able to have Medicaid reimburse for nutritious foods, that not only supports food security and enhancing food security, but it also has tremendous positive health outcomes as a result. So we're doubling down in that area, and we're encouraging many agencies at the state level to focus on that as well. And on the next slide, we really focus on the tangential areas, the root cause areas that contribute to food insecurity, and are recommending investing in many related areas of economic hardship. So investing in programs that make childcare more affordable for families, in reducing the burden of housing costs, and in expanding the adoption of income-based tax credits. We saw as a country that we reduced child poverty in half in 1 year when we increased the child tax credit. So we're encouraging and recommending those types of issues be addressed, because we know all of these are at the root cause of food insecurity as well. I'll turn it to Sabrina for our last two recommendations before we take your questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll go through these quickly. The fourth recommendation we lift up in the report, it relates to workforce development. And that's certainly not a novel concept, but what we elaborate on in our report is that workforce development programs across the region are offering so much opportunity to people, but for individuals who don't have the stability or the longevity economically to take these courses, meaning forego wages or even just the time, the transportation, the childcare that it takes to complete these programs, those need to be offered as wraparound services to boost completion rates for people who, or even enrollment rates, frankly, for people who could benefit from these programs. Next slide, please. And then the last thing that we talk about, I'm going to introduce one new finding as I talk about this recommendation, which is that we found 54% of food insecure people are not accessing charitable food at all, which is extremely high. If you're interested in taking a deep dive into that population in your particular jurisdiction, please reach out. That number 54% varies pretty widely by jurisdiction. But one thing that is consistent across the counties and other cities is the top barriers to engagement within the charitable food system. So you can see here on the screen, number one is awareness. And you can see these statistics below that show how many people say this is a major reason why they don't engage with charitable food. Number 2 is convenience, primarily around the hours of food distributions. And number 3 is stigma. And you can see a few dimensions of that on the screen. The food bank is building some strategic initiatives to address these, but there's no question that we can't address this issue alone and drive that number down from 54% to something much lower. And we've begun forming partnerships with different public sector entities like the DC Library System, for example, to target this awareness issue, to promote resource awareness via the libraries. And there are many other strategies that we can pursue to address these, and we would welcome any partnerships to try and tackle this challenge. That's our last recommendation, so maybe I'll hand it back over to Radha to field. Oh, I'm sorry, we have one more slide. We've been saying this throughout, but I just want to emphasize that we do this report for the benefit of all of our stakeholders across the region, and we can share findings that are tailored to your geography, or even if you want to get very specific about particular demographics. I have a list of things that weren't even featured in the hunger report, but that we captured data on, that we can provide to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out if any of this is of interest and you want to take a deeper dive into the data that we captured from your county. As Radha mentioned, we aim to capture representative data at a pretty granular level so that we can make this useful to you. That is the actual last slide.
Thank you so much. Radha and Sabrina, thank you for the just outstanding and eye-opening presentation. I know it's going to generate some good questions here. I also want to note that we have our Farm Policy Committee Chair, John Steely, who's with us today, and it's great to have you here with us. Thank you very much for your leadership on this work. So again, what we're going to do is we have a resolution. I'm going to make a quick motion to approve the resolution, and that's going to be on the floor, and then I want to turn it over for questions and comments folks have. So let me make a motion to approve Resolution R29-2024. Do I have a second?
Second, Chair Randall.
Thank you, Chair Randall. We've got a second. Okay, so with the motion and the second, now let me turn to discussion. Let me try to do this as best I can. Again, a little round robin. I feel like Virginia's been stuck in the middle, no matter which way I rotate it around. So let's start with Virginia. So any board members from Virginia?
I do have a question.
Yes, Chair Randall.
First of all, thank you for this. This was it's eye-opening. Although Loudon wasn't on the chart that you showed, I do know that our food insecure people has gone up as well. I did put a question in the chat, and I'll just leave that one there for some. You can answer that one later. You know, there are two issues. One, we want to feed people who are food insecure right now, obviously for obvious reasons, as fast as possible. The other reason, though, the other issue, though, is the prevention and what is causing this. And I don't just mean the socioeconomic issues, but I mean, because we've talked about this a lot across the COG region. How many places in COG still have food deserts where you can go to 7-Eleven and grab food, quote unquote, but there's no grocery stores. And so it's not, the issue is not just whether you're putting something in your body, it's actually what you're putting in your body, which means that for local elected officials who do zoning and land use, it's so important that we make sure that as we talk about housing, which we just talked about, that we make sure that when we're putting down housing, we're also putting down housing in places where there's either transit or walkable to healthy food options. And so I think that all these discussions that we're having today actually go together. So that may not be so much of a question for the presenter, as more of something for us to think about as we're doing our zoning. Are we creating these food deserts ourselves? And then obviously that's the long-term solution, but the short-term problem is getting people fed. So these numbers are disturbing. I appreciate the information. It's one of these times that you're glad you have the information. You wish you didn't have to have the information. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Randall. Let me go to Supervisor Lusk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'll say this is the second time I've heard this presentation, and it is heartbreaking again to see the numbers and to really kind of interpret the impact on so many in our community. It's just surprising when you look at the incomes at which people are still food insecure, and it just really clarifies the need that we need to step up and try to help address this problem. I also wanted to note, kind of with the bookending, kind of with kids and seniors, the numbers of food insecure on both ends of that spectrum is very, very enlightening and certainly very disturbing at the same time. I appreciate the points about the areas that we might be able to try to help address this problem. And I just want to maybe focus in a little bit on the upskilling and just acknowledging that we've got to help people get to higher incomes. But even looking at this chart where you show, even at the highest incomes, there's still that point about food insecurity, but at least you see the numbers going down. So clearly there's a correlation there. But I guess the thing that I'll say is I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I just want to acknowledge the great work that you do here in support of our residents. And I just want to, again, congratulate you on the expansion of your facility in my district, so in the Franconia district, and just want to let you know we continue to want to support and help you in the work that you're doing. So thank you for this presentation, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. If I may just add one thing to your point about the workforce development, you're absolutely right in underscoring that, or triple underscoring that. And I would just ask for all of you, if there are community colleges or colleges in your jurisdictions who are not working with the food bank or any of our partners around how to bundle talent development, skill development, and education with food, please have them reach out to us. We're working already in more than close to a dozen colleges in the area on bundling this, because we have heard from the colleges that people are at risk of dropping out of these programs because they need the time to take on a few extra hours of work to pay the rent and put food on the table. And what we can do is support them by providing them and their families with food as they go through these skill development programs to get them to that higher wage and the living wage. So please do reach out to us if there are community colleges in particular, but also four-year colleges in your area that you think we should partner with.
Thanks. Supervisor Bailey, I think I saw your hand up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is about this is, again, I'm like Rodney, it's a sobering presentation, but a much needed one, and we appreciate it. But my question is about the senior citizens, the comment that you had in your presentation about there's opportunity there for them. How do we make sure that we're presenting those opportunities to them? Because I know, that there is there is a concern, even with our seniors that are active,
Yes, just very quickly, and I'm happy to continue the conversation offline. We look at our senior population and break them up into different subsegments. So as you say, there's an active senior population that is looking to be able to either return to work, get more work, add to their skills, and there's a set of programs and partnerships we have around that. There are others who are no longer perhaps in the workforce and cannot be for various reasons and are older. And then there are programs like the government CSFP program that they need to be made aware of and be able to qualify for. And then there's the policy around just expanding who can be a part of that and making it easier. So if they're already on Medicare, for example, to immediately qualify for CSFP, which is the food nutrition program for seniors. So there are different ways we're looking at our seniors, and happy to continue that conversation with you on what can be done from a policy perspective as well.
Yeah, I would like that for no other reason than, even the active ones who have been in the workforce and now retiring, sometimes they don't know how to access those kinds of resources. So I'd appreciate that, a next level conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Let me turn to our Maryland colleagues. Any questions or comments?
Just really quickly, thank you again for the information. And it is kind of heartbreaking when you look at it. And, as I saw Prince George's County pop up several times in that, it is, again, heartbreaking. But as you go through that, and as we reach out and as we try to work more together, I think one of the interesting things is you say about us making sure in our zoning that we don't create food deserts in what we do. And then and that's a challenge as we try to provide affordable housing and housing, to also make sure that we can figure out how to get a lot of the candidly the grocery stores and the supermarket to move into certain areas. Are you able to assist with some of that kind of general? How do we get them to do that?
We're happy to assist with that. Again, very briefly, in DC, we helped sort of take the incentives that were provided across the district for grocery stores to help target it and narrow it towards grocery store development east of the Anacostia. And there's been, good strides made in that front. And second, we also have alternative format grocery store ideas and ways of getting food to people that don't have to fit in the traditional 40, 50,000 square foot physical infrastructure that we've had traditionally. We have something called curbside groceries, which is a grocery store on wheels, that it goes and makes stops in different parts of Prince George's County, as well as east of the Anacostia River in Ward 7 and 8. And we're doing all of these as experiments to show that there is money to be made, impact and food security to be gained, if we take an entrepreneurial view and have alternative models in mind to the traditional models as well. So happy to follow up with you on that in more detail.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I see two more hands, and then we're going to move to a vote on the resolution. So I see Mayor Ashton and County Executive Ehrlich, and then we'll move to the resolution after that.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your presentation. It is sobering, to say the least, and shows we have a lot of work to do. I agree with the comments of my colleagues. I wanted to also tag on, there are areas where we have critical workforce shortages. And so I'm also thinking about, how do we partner with our hospitals who need more techs? How do we partner with bioscience companies who may not need someone who has a PhD, but need someone to help in other aspects? So just maybe to the point you made earlier with the colleges and food service organizations, also trying to help make links where we're seeing workforce shortages, even police, for example, and security. The other piece that was really enlightening for me is to see the awareness issue. Because there are some places where food is available, but people may not be aware or may feel stigmatized to get it. And that seems something we should be able to solve very quickly.
Absolutely. And on the workforce front, that is how we've looked at it. We've worked with the economic development units across all of your counties to look forward for the next few years. What are the jobs that are needed, given the companies that are operating and growing in each of your areas? And you've pointed exactly, Mayor, to the two industries, healthcare and technology. And that's where we look at what are the positions, draw a line at the living wage jobs and up, and then look at the skills and partner with the universities and colleges who are providing that.
Thank you. All right, and Montgomery County Executive Mark Ehrlich, let me turn to you next.
So as a proponent of living wage, I'll just say that even with the minimum wage, you don't even come close to the numbers you need. If you made $25 an hour, which is $10 more than the minimum wage most places, it's $8 more than our minimum wage, two people would earn $100,000. So I'll just say, and I know this is not a popular idea. We ought to be thinking collectively about raising wages in the DC metropolitan area, because it's obscene to have wages as low as they are against the costs. And we ought to be thinking about rent control that ties rent increases to the percentage that of wages going up in a year. Montgomery County's got 6% rent control. It excludes housing units built in the last 20 years. So we've left out a ton of people who are stuck in housing. But even with 6% rent controls, when wages go up, if you're lucky in the lower income sectors, 2 to 3% a year, it's just a matter of time when these people are no longer able to. I don't know how people manage it, but it's going to make it even worse. But these are, you're not going to solve a hunger problem if it's taking that much out of $100,000 paycheck unless you deal with wages and you deal with rents. And I know it's politically unpopular. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I think it's the right thing to do. And we can just talk about this all day long, and they're still going to be hungry. And there's not enough free food out there to solve this problem. Oh, by the way, they could be aware of everything everybody's got, and it's not going to make this problem go away. But so I would love to have a conversation someday about how do you create a just society so you don't have this problem in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Executive. I know we are just a couple of minutes over time, so I want to thank everybody here, but I want to make sure we get to call the question for the vote to approve the resolution. So to our presenters for just the hard work, I think you heard kind of across the board, sobering, eye-opening, but really a call to urgency around it. So thank you all very much for the hard work in the presentation here. So seeing no more questions or comments, let me now call for a vote to approve Resolution R29-2024. Are there any abstentions or nays? And not seeing any, then that means that our motion passes. So again, our thanks to the partners at Capital Area Food Bank, and we really look forward to the continued partnership. And thanks again for your presentation today. Item number 12 is other business. I'm hoping, based on this agenda, that we don't have any additional business at this moment, but let me just ask to make sure. Any additional business? Fantastic. None of you have none additional business. Wonderful. All right, that means we can move to item number 3, which is adjourning. So I want to thank everybody for participating in today's meeting. I know we packed a lot in, but we had a lot of great information, as well as took a lot of great actions on behalf of our region. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. Our next COG board meeting is going to take place in person on Wednesday, November 13th. So I expect to see everybody there in person. And I don't know what Clark has got cooked up for lunch, but I'm sure it's going to be delicious and it'll get us all there. So thanks, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thanks again for a great meeting. And we are now adjourned.
Have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.